Doctors of Reddit, what's the creepiest thing you've encountered while on the job? Verifying death is always sad, but my friend tells the funniest story about how creepy his first verification of death was. This is not meant to disrespect anyone. Black humor is a huge part of doctors' coping strategies. He was on a night shift a few weeks into his first job as a qualified doctor and got a call from a ward to say a lady had passed away an unexpected death, hence he hadn't been called about her before, and could he come verify and do the paperwork. It's a busy shift with lots of sick people to see first, so he takes several hours to get there. He goes up and they tell him she's in room 8. The door to room 8 is slightly ajar and the room is dark. Now, she was in a side room, but most patients there were in shared bays of 6 beds, so you get into the habit of not turning lights on. In his nervous haste, to make sure it didn't look like he was nervous, he slipped into the room armed only with his little pen torch. The window was slightly open, and, he swears, the blind rattled against the sill as he crept towards the bed, the tiny circle of light from his torch picking out the rumpled white hospital blanket, only a very slim rise showing where she lay as she was a tiny old lady, just skin and bone. Finally, the light plays over her face, and he has to bite back a little scream, nearly dropping the torch. For whatever reason, her pose in death is one of the horrified and horrifying snarl, lips drawn back to bare, likely false, teeth, the whites of her eyes showing in a fixed blind stare, and both hands up close to her face curled into claws, slightly overlong nails shining grimly in the meager torchlight. Now, to verify death, the doctor has to listen for heart and breath sounds for 2 minutes, while feeling for a pulse, check for pupil reactions and check for no response to pain. He flicked the torch dutifully across her glaring eyes, forcing himself to shuffle close enough to touch first to check for response to pain, and then to settle shaking fingers on her throat, so close to those furiously grinning teeth to feel for a pulse. To get his stethoscope under the collar of her gown under the blankets, he has to lean in even closer, almost nose to nose with her now, unable to draw his gaze away from hers. And he has to stand like that for 2 minutes. The seconds crawling away as he stares into that screaming face. He says there's no way he would have heard heart or breath sounds, even if she had been alive. All he could hear was his own racing heart in his ears, and, on a loop in his head, please don't let her move. Please don't move. Oh dear God, don't move. Medical student. While on my psych rotation, came across an individual who was a chemistry graduate student. Apparently he had been taking astronomical amounts of ketamine, and he was just continuously disassociated. For the entire time I was on this portion of the rotation, 3 weeks, I never heard him speak a word. 95% of the time we was wrapped up in his sheets like a mummy, and he would just periodically laugh, a crazy soft chuckle, from under his covers, if you tried to talk to him. The creepiest laugh I've ever heard. I'll never forget that. I work as a psychotherapist in a hospital system. My definition of creepy is probably quite a bit different from other medical professionals. The one that got to me the most was a patient who came to us after attempting suicide by sawing both his arms off at the forearm with a table saw. His arms were reattached, fairly successfully too, with only limited impairments in mobility. All I could think was how bad it would have to be to live in his head that sawing his arms off seemed better than that. He has since completed suicide. Edit. A table saw is a saw mounted in a table that stays on once turned on. All you have to do is run things into the saw to cut them. This is how he could cut both arms off. Also, suffice it to say that if you are in a state of mind that finds cutting your arms off to kill yourself or to relieve psychological pain, you are not in the state of mind to determine the most efficient way to kill yourself. When I was on a rotation during med school, we got a call about a 23-year-old woman who was shot in the head and who was already completely gone, but was reportedly 5 months pregnant, so they were doing CPR until they got her to the hospital to see if the baby was viable. They got her to the and did an ultrasound, and turned about baby was full term, and they did a C-section in like under a minute and got the baby out. I don't think it's so incredibly uncommon, but it was pretty surreal to see a baby delivered from a dead person with their brain exposed, and she was pretty close to the same age I was at the time. Paramedic checking in. A few years ago I responded to a call for a pregnant female who shot herself. The 911 caller hung up before any more information could be gathered by dispatch. We arrived to find a girl in her early to mid-20s sitting on the bathroom floor, leaning against the front of the bathtub slumped over. She was obviously pregnant, looked to be third trimester to me. She was unresponsive and barely breathing with a rapid carotid pulse. A small revolver was on the floor next to her. We found a single gunshot wound to the center of her very pregnant abdomen. The patient's mother and 4-year-old son were on scene. The mother told us that the patient invited her over for dinner for some company as she had been fighting with the father of her fetus all day long. The mother stated that in the middle of dinner the patient excused herself from the table to use the bathroom. That's when the mother heard a single gunshot. Anyway, the mother told us that the patient was 23 and was almost full term. I can't remember how many weeks, but it was 34 with her second pregnancy. To make a long story short, we intubate the patient, establish 2/4, carry her down from the second floor to the truck, and haul us to the trauma center. The patient went into cardiac arrest as we were wheeling her into the hospital. CPR was started, and an emergency C-section was performed in the ER. Both mom and baby died. The bullet went through the baby and through mom's abdominal aorta. Her belly was full of blood. Fucked up cool. Nothing I can say can possibly describe the year I worked in psychiatric intensive care. Creepy isn't the thing that comes to mind when I think back on it. More heartbreaking and horrifying. But creepiness was a part of it. Especially evening and night shifts. Naturally, there is always something disturbing about watching someone while they hallucinate. You can tell it is 100% real to them, and something about that makes you believe it, on some level. A lot of stories end with, and of course, I had to look over my shoulder to make sure you see the emotions it brings out. Here's a couple stories. There was a woman that came in and sat down across the table from me for her admission interview. She had bandages all over her arms and scotch tape over her mouth and ears. She looked very uncomfortable and wouldn't really sit still. When the nurse would ask her a question, she would peel the corner of the tape back and answer, then stick the tape back on really fast. We eventually found out that she saw and felt bugs crawling all over her, and they were trying to get inside her body. The tape was to keep the bugs out. The bandages were because some bugs got in, and she had to dig them out. She couldn't sit still because she felt the bugs all over her, even while we sat and talked. The worst part was, she had some idea that it was her mind playing tricks on her. Can you imagine going through your life, feeling like someone is continuously dumping buckets of cockroaches on your head, feeling like they're all over you, and getting inside of you to the point that you're digging chunks out of your flesh in a panic, all while knowing intellectually that none of it is real? Another story, a girl spent my entire 8-hour shift fist fighting the same ghost. She would throw a few punches and obviously landed knockout blows, so she'd bend over and twist her hand around like she was wrapping some long hair around her wrist. She'd drag her opponent down the hallway, give a few good kicks, then set up for a curb stomp. Starts off kinda funny, then gets a little disturbing when you think about the graphic things going on in her mind, then just sad after you watch this replay for hours on end. Nothing I can say can possibly describe the year I worked in psychiatric intensive care. Creepy isn't the thing that comes to mind when I think back on it. More heartbreaking and horrifying. But creepiness was a part of it. Especially evening and night shifts, naturally. Posted earlier, but this is better. As a tech in psych years ago, there was a 7-year-old kid sent to the floor because the mom didn't know what to do with him. Sadly common thing to happen, even if the kids don't have page issues. Anyway, the mom was shaking and crying, and they had to take the kid into another room. She was genuinely afraid of her own son. She had suspected something was wrong when she kept finding mutilated animals in the backyard, but never heard or saw coyotes or anything around. The neighbor's smaller pets started disappearing. The boy had an obsession with knives, hiding them around the house, denying anything when the mom confronted him. Then when the two started getting into arguments, he would get really violent and hit her, push her down and kick her, threaten to kill her. On multiple occasions she woke up in the middle of the night with him standing beside her bed, staring her in the face. She put extra locks on her bedroom door to feel safe while they slept. The last straw was when she lifted up his mattress and found 50 plus knives of all shapes and sizes under there. So she brought him to us. I remember talking to him, treating him like he was just any other kid that came through. He seemed remarkably normal until you spoke directly to him. He had this way of looking right through you, or maybe like he didn't see you at all while you were speaking. He would respond like a robot, like he was just saying words, because that's what we wanted to hear. And B would always put on this creepy dead looking smile, like all mouth and no eye involvement in the smile. Especially when he would get away with something, like taking another kid's markers and they couldn't figure it out. Still gives me chills laying here thinking about him. I had to get up and close my bedroom door. Nothing I can say can possibly describe the year I worked in psychiatric intensive care. Creepy isn't the thing that comes to mind when I think back on it, more heartbreaking and horrifying. But creepiness was a part of it, especially evening and night shifts. Naturally, whenever you admit a patient you have to inquire about their DNR status in case of a code being called. I had one elderly patient, late 80s/early 90s, who was severely demented and chronically ill, in and out of the hospital every month barely holding on to life. Basically a horrible miserable quality of life. I asked the patient's family, I think it was a granddaughter who had medical power, but I'm not sure, it was a while ago, about their DNR status. You don't want to put someone through a brutal resuscitation. That may not even work if it isn't something that they would want if they wanted to die naturally. She flat out stated that, oh, we want everything done for him because we really need his check. I didn't understand at first, but apparently the family was living off of his social security and could not have cared less about his pain and suffering or his wishes. I'm pretty sure it was the creepiest thing I've seen. These people were supposed to be his loved ones taking care of him, and they were using him like an inhuman object. Edit. Added not because I'm a misuser of the English language. Relative of mine worked in a cancer unit. Acquaintance was diagnosed and became their patient. This poor girl came from the whitest of trash. They were 6 to 7 living in a trailer with dying grandpa on a ventilator in the living room. They were keeping him around for the check too. The mom denied anything beyond the basic of treatments for the daughter. She was an adult, but left weak and ill from a couple radiation doses. The mother's excuse was that her daughter was needed at home to take care of her mother's new baby. That's right, she literally sacrificed her oldest daughter to take care of her youngest because she couldn't be expected to do it all. I saw the family a couple times after the daughter passed. I remember the callousness over her death. It was all bitching about bills and the loss of welfare because they were now down to only 5 in the household. Remembering this brought back some memories of her. The daughter had her own issues when she was alive. I met her when she was like 15 and I was in my 20s. She cornered me in a bathroom trying to have sex with me. Remembering that reminded me of how another friend was cornered by the mother in the same fashion some time later. I swear they were trying to farm babies for welfare. A nurse here was doing CPR on a lady whose heart had stopped. They initially rolled her into the room unconscious and not breathing. This lady is pretty much dead. However, in the middle of doing chest compressions, her hands reach up and grasp my wrists and then fall back to hanging off the table. We never got her back.